Welcome, everyone. My name is Uwe Brandis. I'm professor of practice here at Georgetown University, and I'm the faculty director of the Georgetown Global Cities Initiative. And I'd like to extend a very, very warm welcome to all of our friends in South Africa who are joining us for this workshop. We're really, really excited. I've just included this slide just for you to know where we are. This is the university in Washington, D.C. as our backdrop. This is a very special opportunity for us. Our initiative here at Georgetown has partnered with the UN Habitat Agency through their World Urban Campaign to host a conference this fall, which we are organizing as a digital conference under the banner of the World Urban Campaign's Urban Thinkers Campus program. So this work is going to be feeding up into the UN Habitat system, and we're really, really excited to be exploring and learning from you today. This is all under the context of this conference that we are calling International Practices of Place Management through Multi-Sector Partnerships. And what we're really excited to be exploring here are the many different kinds of partnerships that express themselves in a place-based way. We do have three kind of high-level questions that we are asking as part of this overall conference. The first is really about how the partnerships form and who's part of them. The second is really about the management of the partnerships and how the work is advanced. And then the third is really kind of like a very large question, and that is, how do these partnerships relate to or embrace the various goals associated with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? And I want to extend our very kind of grateful feelings to everyone in South Africa who's joining us today. It's really a very big pleasure and an honor for us to be engaged in dialogue with you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Priscilla Ford, who's going to moderate the session today. And I also want to extend a very special thank you to Priscilla. Priscilla, over to you.
Thanks so much, Uwe. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. As he mentioned before, I am Priscilla Ford. I am a Global Cities Initiative Scholar for 2023 and 2024. And I'm also the founder of Spaces for Souls, which is a globally focused spatial justice organization. I'm super excited today to be moderating this panel of all women South African urban practitioners. And so I'm just going to do a quick introduction of all of our panelists today, and then we're going to move into the first part of our case study. So I will kind of go through order of appearance. First, we have Ms. Ayanda Roji. She is the head of environmental education and research at the Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo, and she's also the convener of the Center for African Public Spaces, also known as CAPS. Next, we have Ms. Debbie Hendricks. She is a registered professional in town and regional planning with the South African Council for Planners, and she's also the operations executive for the Mandela Bay Development Agency. Next, we have Ms. Palisa Moreku. She is a program manager at the What If Trust. And then we have Nakwanda Zakia Shabangu, who is the manager of strategic stakeholder engagement at the What If Trust as well. So I think we can go ahead and get started. We've got our slides up, and I can hand it over to Ayanda to kick us off with the case studies.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. So I work for the City Council of Johannesburg, based in South Africa, and we are responsible for conserving and managing parks and other open spaces, such as nature reserves, boat gardens, the zoo, cemeteries, and so forth and so on. Just to give a context, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So this slide is just to reflect on the context. I think the city of Johannesburg is a post-apartheid city, and the fact that both the colonial and apartheid policies you can see even today. So that history is continuing to be with us, is working with us. So even though we try as the City of Johannesburg Parks and Zoo Agency to redress the imbalances of the past, but the consequences of those policies, they still impact the actual provision of services, particularly the creation of public spaces in the city today. And also in terms of apartheid, green spaces were also a tool of exclusion, so as we continue to green the city, we confront so many challenges. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So there are so many challenges that we confront, that history and the fact that South Africa is one of the unequal countries in the world. And you see that not just spatially, but economically. And all those issues, they play themselves out in parks and other public open spaces. So we are confronted with various challenges of managing public spaces. I can just cite homelessness as one of them. We have people that stay that stay in our parks. Next slide, please. Looking at how public open spaces, or I can say urban greening, is viewed in South Africa, but also on the continent. We have competing demands. I mean, we have housing a shortage, we've got serious issues. So issues around public spaces are not really, they are seen as an afterthought, but there are other issues that sort of affect the fact that we don't really value public spaces. One of the things is that it's difficult to advocate for public spaces, especially green spaces, because it's hard to put a price tag on that. And also the short political term of office for mayors and also other politicians. So you have one mayor that really believes, in the value and importance of public space, but the next one maybe won't see them as important. So those are some of the issues. Next slide, please. I just wanted to show this slide because I talked about how public spaces, particularly green spaces, are not really prioritized on the continent. But I think during COVID, especially during lockdown, the whole period was like an expose of some sort. It worsened things, it uncovered things, it showed us where we are lacking and also where we have like plenty of green spaces and tree coverage and so forth. So it showed the inequalities, but at the same time, for people who are working around public space and green spaces, I think people know the importance of that and also the link between that and how they promote health and well-being. Next slide, please. We can move to the next slide. Okay, we can skip this one as well. I think Debbie has done justice in terms of talking about the context and also the history of South Africa, so I won't dwell much on that. So I'll present a case of Gilfillan Park. Gilfillan Park is in the inner city of Johannesburg. This is a park where two entities of the City Council of Johannesburg came together and collaborated with a private sector company and also collaborated with communities in terms of upgrading a park. So the reason or the background to this was that as Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo, year after year, we would see the customer satisfaction survey findings, and we will see that safety is one of the priorities, if not the top priority, in terms of people experiencing these public spaces. Meaning you can green all you want, but if people they are not able to access the spaces, we are missing the point. So this worried us, and together with another department that deals with public safety and another one that deals with infrastructure development within the city, we said, hey, this is concerning. And we had a series of conversations with different stakeholders. And we found out that there's two things that are standing in the way. The first one was the fragmentation in terms of how we operate as city departments, the silo mentality. And the second one is the fact that we are not collaborating enough and listening to communities or the users of the spaces, to allow them to voice their opinions in terms of, desires, views, and their needs, so that in the end, these spaces could be owned and also could be sustained. So we said, let's try these two things, So we came jointly as these departments, and we partnered with the private sector, and then we partnered with the community of Gilfillan Park. So Gilfillan Park is based in Jeppestown, which is in the inner city of Johannesburg. It's a densely populated suburb of Johannesburg, and is surrounded by hostels. So during apartheid, hostels were built like prisons to house black laborers in the diamond and gold mines. So they were designed really for total control, and they were designed or built very cheaply with zero provision for space for social interaction or for space for employment or opportunity. So the hostels, they still exist today, and so they serve as homes, and as places for community for tens of thousands of South Africans. So meaning that they provide accommodation, especially in areas where people live in informal housing. So they are very important. Next slide, please. So this is just an image that shows like the nature of the hostels, and this is in Jeppestown. We can move to the next slide. So this is a quote by Babam Velase. I think Debbie talked a lot about some areas in South Africa where people still feel neglected or excluded. So Babam Velase was saying that they feel that they've been neglected for many years, since the dawn of democracy, because they haven't seen the fruits of democracy. They voted for government, and they feel that government doesn't care about them or about what happens there. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows how the park looked like before and how it was a vibrant space, but the community wanted more than just having a piece of land where they can gather. They wanted more facilities. Next slide, please. So the case study really is about the co-creation process. It's also about how it was important for the city to partner with another sector to make sure that we are able to undertake a co-creation process. So city councils, mostly, they use the town hall approach in terms of public participation. It's very important because most of the time, you know, those platforms, you can't really have anything meaningful. In most cities, it's like a tick box exercise, you know, for compliance. And there are many reasons for this. And one of the reasons is that sometimes city practitioners, they don't really have adequate skills to facilitate and navigate these difficult processes. I think Debbie mentioned that in South Africa, public spaces are contested spaces. And when I was presenting about the context, I wanted to show that the legacy of the past, you know, is still with us. And we see the consequences of having a past like that. And as an entity that deals with urban greening in the city, you are like in a catch-22. On one hand, you want to promote the connection to nature. And then on the other, you have the down and outs of society seeking refuge in these very same parks and public spaces. So what do you do? Because these are about structural and systematic issues. People are seeking refuge because maybe they are faced with transient homelessness, where you find people that are on the margins of the city, far away from places of work, you know. They have houses far away from the core or the city center, but they don't have enough money to commute from Monday to Friday, but can only go back home on Friday. So they see themselves, or they end up sleeping in public spaces so that they are closer to places of work. So that is very complex. They are not drug addicts, you know. They are not people without homes. And this whole experience showed us that homelessness is not just about houselessness. It's more than that. So those are some of the complexities that we are faced with in South Africa. And also in terms of our history, where one population or few, you know, segments, a group of segment of society used to have access to public spaces, and others didn't have. So all those issues, they come into play in terms of how you design, how you plan, and how you manage the spaces. So you need skills, and you need time, and so forth and so on. And there are other issues as well. But I must say that even though I'm saying that we have limited skills because most of the time those skills are not taught at university, but those skills are important. But those skills reside somewhere with civil society organizations. Or so I think the issue is, how can we strengthen relationships, you know, with sectors that are like non-state sectors for city making, or to make sure that our cities are just and sustainable. Next slide, please. So together with Beala, which is a private sector company, we said, okay, let's try things differently. Let's supplement this community hall approach, you know. So we started observing how the space is being used. I mean, as a city practitioner, it's hard to do this kind of work, you know, to have time and capacity to go and observe before you start the process, you know, and also to go back even after you have designed or produced the park, to go back and see how the space is being used. So this is what we did, just to see how the space is being used. We had multiple engagements with key focus group discussions, and with key groups that are using the space. There was a school that is called Streetlight School, soccer players, and we had open park open days. We tried so many things. So we could see that on Sundays, you know, the park is used differently. There's like traditional dance competitions. And then on other days, it's being used maybe more by the school. And on Saturdays, it's being used by the church. And also there's a boxing tournament. So diverse uses of the space. And we recorded this. Next slide, please. So the process that we undertook together as these three institutions was to say, let's use something that is very simple, that people can understand. So we discussed with them to say that, let's come up with the rules of the park. How are we going to use the park, together? And what was powerful was that we let people, or we allow them to use their own languages, depending on where they are coming from. And we talked about what is it that you like about the park, what is it that you don't like, what is your priority, what is important, and also let's design your park, just draw a map with the amenities that you want. And then lastly, we said what goes where. Okay, you say you want a bench, where, do you envision the bench should be? So we did this together with these different groups, churches, dancers, school children, and the businesses that are there, and people from the hostel. Next slide, please. We can flip this slide. This is just showing the map. And this is just showing the rules that people came up with. Like one is saying that we need security in the park. The other one was saying that we need to see diverse people in the park. Next one, please. And then this is just like, what are some of the things that they don't like, the fact that there's burning of stuff in the park, and there's no toilet in the park. I think it was a big issue. And then the other one was like other things they want to continue to enjoy and dance and so forth and so on. Next slide, please. And then this is where we ask them to prioritize what is the most important thing, to them. And toilet was the most important thing. And having conversations afterwards, with people living in the park, with people living in the neighborhood. They would talk about toilets as so important in terms of comfort, but also in terms of dignity. In most places in the city, you have to pay for a toilet. And they talk about the dilemma of not having enough money. You have to decide to buy a loaf of bread or to use a toilet. So issues of dignity and so forth and so on, it challenged us in terms of how we design and produce parks, in terms of what we see as important and how important this co-design process is with the community. Next slide, please. And then this is just to show the different maps that people came up with. Next one. And this is just to show where people were showing us or were saying that what they want and where the things that they wanted should be placed. Next slide. So this is the design of the park, and I think the developers that we worked with, they won an award in terms of the park, but also in terms of the co-creation process that was carried out. Next slide, please. So it took time for us to have the toilet, but because it was a priority, we had to make sure that that happens. So we're happy about this. And it was a negotiated implementation because in the beginning, before the upgrade, the city didn't have a toilet there. So we had to negotiate and show how important to have it, and what is the meaning of having one in a public space. Next slide. And then there's some of the lessons that we learned or considerations was the fact that, placemaking is such a good arena for building cohesive communities, because the whole process takes time, and by meeting so very often, people tend to build, relations. And the fact that I want to mention everything, but also how we look at placemaking beyond, I think Debbie mentioned about the fact that it's beyond beautification or landscaping, but also it's beyond street activation, but in South Africa, because of the history, but I hear also in India, in terms of other placemakers, is about basic stuff. It's about basic services. It's about dignity. It's about having humane-centered cities, you know. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is the fact that after COVID, the school that we worked with shut down. And we are challenging ourselves, and we're thinking about maybe next time is a lesson to bring in economic development to ensure financial sustainability, not only of the park, but also, you know, of the partners that we are working with to ensure that the park is sustainable and the park is owned. I think the last one is that place management takes time. Sorry, just before that, place management takes time and it's an ongoing process. I think because of lack of resources, sometimes we produce a park and we leave it like with someone from the community or with a structure, but it never ends. It needs champions, both from the state, but also from other parties involved to continue with the process. And then I just wanted to mention that in the beginning, I think Priscilla said that I'm convening a Center on African Public Spaces. And part of that, of the center, which is a knowledge exchange hub, you know, dedicated to African public spaces. This is where we mobilize and connect public space advocates, both within the state and outside the state, to reimagine African cities, you know, reimagine how they are designed and managed. So one of the things that we've been focusing on is to create a placemaking Africa network. So we're building on the work of the placemaking Nairobi network. So Nairobi has been very active in terms of placemaking. Right now, they have like placemaking week where they have a series of activities focusing on different sectors, really, you know, connecting placemakers and other public space advocates to have activities to promote placemaking and public spaces. So the idea for the Center on African Public Spaces is to look at other African cities to say, okay, you can see what is being done by Nairobi. Can we do the same in our cities? I think the issue is that there are so many people doing wonderful things in many African cities, but the issue is how do we connect them and make sure that the impact is visible. Next slide. I think this is the last slide. Oh, thank you so much. So thank you, Priscilla.
Thank you so much for that, Ayanda.